All right, ready to dive deep. Today, we're tackling Aristotle, specifically his categories. One of the most influential texts in, well, Western thought.
Hmm.
But don't worry, you don't need a toga. Or a philosophy degree to follow along. By the end of this deep dive, you'll see how a guy from over 2,000 years ago still shapes the way we think about, well, everything.
It really is amazing how relevant Aristotle remains. You know, what I find particularly fascinating is how he doesn't start with like some grand theory of the universe.
Right.
He starts with something we all do every single day, just labeling and categorizing the world around us.
So like how I categorize my sock drawer. You know, athletic socks, dress socks, that one fuzzy sock that's lost its mate.
Exactly, except Aristotle is categorizing on a much, much grander scale, you know. He begins by breaking down how we use names. He dives into the difference between what he calls equivocal and univocal names.
Okay, time to dust off the old brain cells here. Remind me, what are those again?
Okay, so think of the word bat. You could be talking about, the nocturnal creature
Right.
or the thing you use to hit a baseball.
Yeah.
Same word, completely different meanings. That's what's called an equivocal name. A univocal name, on the other hand, has one consistent meaning. Like cat always refers to a furry feline friend.
Okay, so Aristotle's pointing out that before we can even start, like, categorizing the world, we need to make sure we're all speaking the
Right.
same language.
Wait, precisely.
Yeah.
He understood that clear communication, it hinges on shared understanding. Because if I say bat and you're picturing a furry mammal, but I'm thinking about a wooden stick, well, our conversation's going to get pretty confusing.
And that's where the concept of substance comes in, right? I remember that being, like, a big deal for Aristotle.
Absolutely. Substance is at the heart of his whole system of categories. He argues that to understand anything, we need to grasp its substance, its fundamental essence.
Okay, so beyond just the name cat,
Right.
Aristotle wants to get at what makes a cat, what makes it different from a dog or a rock or a cloud.
Exactly. He distinguishes between primary substance, which is the individual thing itself,
Right.
like this particular cat,
Okay.
and then secondary substance, which is the species and genus that it belongs to, like cat and animal.
Got it. So primary substance is like the specific unique entity.
Yes.
And secondary substance is more like the general category or classification it falls under.
Exactly.
But why is this distinction so important?
Well, because it helps us differentiate between what a thing is and what merely, describes it. A cat's catness, its essential nature, it's more fundamental than its color, its size, its temperament. Those are just qualities.
So you're saying that even if a cat's missing a tail
Yeah.
or is hairless or has, an attitude problem,
Uh-huh.
it's still essentially a cat because it possesses that underlying catness.
Precisely. Now, qualities are fascinating in their own right. Aristotle throws all sorts of things into this category. Habits, dispositions, even things that affect our senses.
Hang on. How can things like knowledge or a hot temper be in the same category as like the color red or the smell of coffee? They seem so different.
Yeah, that's what's so interesting about Aristotle's approach. He saw qualities as anything that can be said of a substance.
Hmm.
This includes things that seem permanent,
Right.
like knowledge,
Okay.
as well as things that change easily, like temperature.
So a cat's knowledge of where to find the best napping spots is a quality.
Yeah.
Just like its black fur or its grumpy disposition.
Exactly, but Aristotle makes a crucial distinction here. He separates what's inherent in the thing itself from how we perceive it.
I'm intrigued. What do you mean by that?
Okay, let's take sweetness as an example.
Okay.
Honey has this quality of sweetness, but our experience of that sweetness, how much we enjoy it, or whether we even find it sweet at all, that's a different matter. That falls under the category of perception, not quality.
So he's saying there's a difference between the objective quality of the honey and our subjective experience of it.
Yes.
That's pretty sophisticated for a guy who lived over 2,000 years ago.
Aristotle was a very keen observer, both of the world and the human mind. Now, another category he delves into is relation,
Okay.
which gets at the idea that some things only make sense in the context of other things.
Like how up only makes sense if there's also a down.
Exactly. Aristotle uses examples like double half, master slave, and knowledge knowable to illustrate this concept. These pairs, they're inherently linked. One cannot exist without the other.
Okay, I see how those are related concepts, but I have to admit the master-slave example makes me a little uncomfortable.
Yeah, it's important to remember the historical context here. Aristotle lived in a society where slavery was commonplace. And while we can acknowledge the problematic nature of that example, it doesn't negate the underlying concept of relation, which is still relevant today.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you addressing that. It's a good reminder that even brilliant minds can be influenced by the limitations of their time. So these relational pairs, they come into existence at the same time, right? Like you can't have a double without a half. They both appear simultaneously.
That's what Aristotle argues, except perhaps when it comes to knowledge. He suggests that knowledge requires something to be known first. It's a bit of a head-scratcher.
It really makes you wonder, right? Like, do ideas exist out there in the world waiting to be discovered, or do they only come into being when we start thinking about them? That's a question philosophers are still grappling with today.
It is, and it speaks to the enduring power of Aristotle's ideas. Because he wasn't just categorizing the world, he was prompting us to think deeply about the nature of knowledge, existence, and reality itself.
So we've covered names, substance, qualities, and relations. My brain is already doing some heavy lifting here. What other categories did Aristotle come up with?
Well, one that might surprise you is opposites, and he breaks them down into 4 distinct types.
Okay, opposites.
That seems, I don't know, pretty straightforward, right? Like hot and cold, light and dark. What's so complicated about opposites?
Well, Aristotle, being Aristotle, he had to break it down further.
Of course.
He identified 4 types of opposites.
Okay.
You've got your correlatives,
Yeah.
like double and half,
Right.
which, they depend on each other for their very definition.
Right. Can't have one without the other. It's like there's no half without a whole to divide in the first place.
Exactly.
What were the other kinds?
Then there are contraries, like good and bad.
Okay.
These are at opposite ends of a spectrum, but sometimes they have intermediates, shades of gray between black and white.
Ah. So some opposites are, a bit fuzzier than others. There's room for like in-between states.
Right.
I'm guessing Aristotle had a category for the black and white ones too.
You bet. Those would be privatives, like sight and blindness.
Right.
It's either one or the other, no middle ground there.
Mm-hmm.
And lastly, he includes affirmatives and negatives. Basically stating that something is versus that it is not. Like he sits, he does not sit.
Wow, so he really thought of everything, huh?
Yeah.
It's interesting how these categories of opposites, they can even like shape how we argue and debate, right? Like if there's a spectrum, it's harder to take like an extreme position, right? Like maybe something isn't purely good or bad, but somewhere in between.
Exactly. Recognizing these different types of opposites, it can encourage more nuanced thinking, which is always a good thing. Now, are you ready to tackle another intriguing category?
Hit me with it. My brain is warmed up now.
All right. How about prior and simultaneous?
Okay.
This delves into the ideas of, time, order, and causality.
Okay. I'm sensing this is about more than just what came first. Like, the chicken or the egg.
You got it.
Okay.
So prior can mean older in time, but it can also mean logically necessary.
Right.
For example, Aristotle argues that 1 is prior to 2 because you can't have 2 without first having 1. So it's not, he's talking about like a conceptual order, not just chronological order.
Right.
Okay, that's pretty abstract.
It is. And then there's simultaneous, which Aristotle explains as things existing together without one causing the other.
Okay.
So think of like a double and its half.
Right.
They exist at the same time, interconnected,
Great.
but not in a cause and effect relationship.
So prior can be about time or logic, and simultaneous is about things existing together without, necessarily influencing each other. I'm starting to feel like I'm seeing the matrix here, like all these hidden connections and relationships.
That's the beauty of diving deep into philosophy.
Yeah.
It reveals the underlying structures of our thinking, things we often just take for granted.
All right, bring on the next challenge. What other mind-bending categories did Aristotle come up with?
Well, he certainly didn't forget about actions. In fact, he had a whole category dedicated to them, which he called motion.
Motion. But we already talked about change when we were discussing qualities. How is motion different?
You're right to pick up on that. But remember, Aristotle, he was thinking in broader terms. When he said motion, he wasn't just talking about like physical movement. He identified 6 types: generation, destruction, increase, decrease, alteration, and change of place.
Whoa, hold on. Okay, so motion includes coming into being, ceasing to exist, growing, shrinking, changing in quality. That's a lot more than just moving from point A to point B.
Precisely. He is encompassing all kinds of change and transformation within this category.
Hmm.
And what's particularly interesting is how he distinguishes alteration from the other types.
Okay, I'm all ears. How is alteration different?
Aristotle argued that something could be altered without changing size or location.
Okay,
Imagine a piece of fruit ripening on a tree.
right.
It's still the same apple, but its qualities are transforming. Its color, its texture, its taste are all changing.
Well, that's a perfect example. It's like personal growth too, right? Like we can go through, significant internal changes without physically moving or getting bigger.
Exactly. Aristotle's categories, while grounded in his observations of the physical world, have, surprising applications to abstract concepts and even our own personal development.
My mind is officially blown. Okay, so we've covered names, substance, qualities, relations, opposites, priority and simultaneity, and now motion. That's quite a list. What's the final category we need to unpack?
The last one might seem a bit, deceptively simple,
Okay.
but it's full of nuance. Aristotle called it having.
Having. Okay, I'm completely lost. What did he even mean by that?
Think of it this way. Having encompasses like possession and relationship. We say we have knowledge or we have virtue, indicating like a kind of possession of those qualities.
Right. Those qualities are a part of us in some way. We possess them internally.
Yes. And then he extends this idea to quantity, like saying, we have a certain height or we have a certain weight.
Right, right.
It also applies to things we wear or own, like having a coat or having a ring.
Okay, so having can refer to things that are like literally a part of us, things we possess externally, and even abstract qualities. That's a pretty broad category.
It is. It is. And Aristotle, he takes it even further. He talks about contents, like a vessel having wine.
I see. Like the container possesses the contents.
Right.
But then he gets into some interesting territory, right? Like saying a man has a wife and a wife has a husband.
Right. So this is where having moves beyond simple possession and into the realm of relationships. It highlights how individuals can be connected through, various social bonds.
It's fascinating how he weaves together like physical, mental, and social aspects of having into this single category. It really shows how interconnected all these categories are.
You're getting it. You're getting it. Having can involve qualities, quantities, and even relations, depending on the context. It's a testament to Aristotle's insightful observations about the complexities of existence.
Okay. So we've journeyed through all 10 of Aristotle's categories: substance, quantity, quality, relation, place, time, position, state, action, and affection. It's incredible how he created this framework for understanding the world, over 2,000 years ago. But I have to ask, are these categories still relevant today? I mean, our knowledge and technology have advanced so much since Aristotle's time.
That's an excellent question, and one that we'll delve into in our final segment. Stay with us as we explore the limitations of Aristotle's categories and consider how they might be expanded or adapted to encompass the complexities of the modern world.
Okay, so we're back and ready for this final stretch of our deep dive into Aristotle's categories. We covered a lot of ground here. Yeah. But I'm curious about something you mentioned earlier. You said that while these categories are insightful, they might have some limitations.
Yeah.
Especially when we try to apply them to the modern world.
That's right. Remember, Aristotle was primarily focused on the physical world. His categories were designed to help us understand the objects and the phenomena we experience through our senses.
So things like trees and animals and rocks and colors and sounds, like the tangible stuff of the world.
Exactly. But what about things we can't physically perceive?
Right.
Abstract ideas, like love or justice or freedom. How do those fit into Aristotle's framework?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, his categories seem so well suited for categorizing, things that we can see and touch.
Right.
But what about concepts that exist more in the realm of thought and feeling?
And what about, the digital world we live in today? The internet, social media, virtual reality. I mean, these things didn't even exist in Aristotle's wildest imagination.
I see what you're getting at. So his categories were groundbreaking for their time, but they might not, fully capture the complexities of our modern experience.
That's not to say they're irrelevant,
Right.
Aristotle's categories can still be a valuable starting point for understanding the world. It's like having a sturdy foundation that we can build upon.
So we don't have to throw out the whole system, but maybe we need to, I don't know, expand it, like add some new rooms to the house, so to speak.
Precisely. We might need to adapt his existing categories.
Right.
Or or even create entirely new ones, to account for those aspects of reality that Aristotle didn't or couldn't fully address.
So how do we even begin to do that? Where do we go from here?
Well, that's where you, the listener, come in. You see, Aristotle's work isn't meant to be like a finished product,
Right.
but a springboard for further inquiry. So as you go about your day, start paying attention to how you categorize things. What categories work well for you? Where do you run into limitations? What new categories might be needed to capture the nuances of your own experiences?
That's a great challenge. It's like Aristotle is inviting us all to become philosophers ourselves,
Uh-huh.
to observe the world with a critical and a curious mind.
And there's no one right way to do it. The point is to engage in the process of categorization itself, to become more aware of how we make sense of the world.
Yeah, I love that. This deep dive hasn't only been about understanding Aristotle's ideas, it's also been about like reflecting on my own thinking processes.
And that's the beauty of philosophy, right? It's not just about memorizing facts and figures. It's about developing critical thinking skills that you can apply to, every aspect of your life.
Well said. As we wrap up this deep dive into Aristotle's categories, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought to ponder. Aristotle, he focused on categorizing the physical world, but what about the world of emotions? How would you categorize feelings like joy, sadness, anger, love? What qualities do they possess? What are their opposites? How do they relate to the other categories we've explored today? I'll leave you to grapple with those questions. Thanks for joining us on this fascinating journey. Until next time, keep those minds curious and keep exploring.